Shalom, family, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's weekly news update. And we're going to be covering a number of different things. So, again, thank you so much for joining us, all of you who are here with us on the chat. Let me get little things set up here. Thank you so much. And if somebody can give me a 5x5 to make sure you're hearing me okay. Again, apologize for the air conditioning. Unfortunately, we are in the heat right now here in Arizona. It is a solid 100 degrees every single day. It has been very challenging for all of us here. So I'm sure you guys are all feeling it all around the earth. Last week, we talked about how that they're breaking records. Records are being broken, rather, all across the earth with regard to temperatures and climate. And so I believe that the scripture that talks about men being scorched by the sun has in fact been fulfilled. And at least we're certainly seeing the beginnings of it. And I was reading earlier today that there's a number of people that have gone to the hospital, and thousands have had heat strokes, and some have perished, of course, as a result of the heat. So it's definitely a serious thing out there, folks. So take it seriously. Make sure you hydrate properly. Make sure that you're not putting yourself unnecessarily at risk, especially when you're doing recreational activities. This is oftentimes when people find themselves distressed when they didn't anticipate that they would really be exerting themselves, and suddenly they find themselves distressed physically and so forth. So make sure you stay hydrated out there. Keep your electrolyte count up. Make sure that you keep, especially us older brothers and sisters out there, keep your magnesium levels up. Keep your electrolytes levels up. This is very important for communication between your cells, and important for your for cognitive purposes and other reasons. So for your muscles and so forth, it's how your body communicates. So you need those minerals, and we have been demineralized in our society. Our food supply and many of the things that we have taken for granted have been depleted of the necessary nutrients that we all need to sustain our bodies properly. And so it's not just about liquids, it's also about electrolytes and remineralization. That's a very important thing, especially in the heat. So again, thank you for joining us. I see a few of you joining us right there on YouTube, and it's always a blessing to see you, and a few of you on Facebook as well. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We've got a lot to cover. Before we go too far, I like to always take a few moments to encourage those that may not know about Remnant Watch. Remnant Watch is a labor of love that we do in order to ensure that any of the stories or things that we're talking about that are fulfilling Bible prophecy, that are dealing with the events of the day, are here and available for you to pick up. So you can hop on over to Remnant Watch, bookmark that, and it's a good place to catch up. And we like to keep it simple on our site as far as being able to scroll through the stories and make it easy for folks. And we started to hear from a lot of folks saying they had been disconnected. They were no longer paying attention to the news. And part of the reason for that was, of course, a lot of propaganda and manipulation. And so we try to get rid of as much of that as we can. There's only so much we can do with that, because the stories do come from various sources. So we have to ferret through it to see if we can pick up the patterns and catch what they're actually doing, what the forces, if you will, of the enemy are doing, and also how Bible prophecy is being fulfilled in these times. So we're going to be taking a look at a few things tonight. And our top story is the brewing civil war that is manifesting in Israel. And we do have a serious situation that is happening in Israel. Um, they did, in fact, pass the limit of the Supreme Court, the powers, this thing that has been basically part of the discussion. If you remember a few months ago, we talked about this when this first started to become a heated issue in the public of Israel. And we discussed that they were going to table it, and they did table it, only to revisit it later. Well, turns out that discernment was correct, and they did, in fact, revisit this issue and, in fact, pass. So the Israeli government votes to limit the Supreme Court powers amid mass protests. So Israel is now dropping or descending into some serious division. Israeli lawmakers voted Monday to limit the Supreme Court's ability to strike down government actions, delivering a long-sought goal of the country's ascendant right-wing movement. The measure was pushed through despite months of civil unrest, international condemnations, and pleas from business and security leaders to seek consensus in a deeply divided society on the verge of chaos. Those are not my words, folks. Those are the words that they're using. And so when they start to use those words, we can pretty much expect that they are planning to bring about that chaos. After all, they signal to us, if you're paying attention, when the next act is going to begin. They start to conduct affairs in such a way that we begin to see how the hand is moving. And that's why we do these reports, folks. It's not so that we can just cover news that you can read anywhere else, but so that we can take a look at what's transpiring, how it matches into Bible prophecy and the overview of the world from a biblical perspective. After all, we are seated in the heavens. Amen and amen. Thank you for joining me, seated in the heavens, those of you that are out there. And so Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, has got his hands full. He's not doing so well physically. He himself is, well, I think the pressure's kind of getting to the guy. Netanyahu says he'll undergo surgery tonight to implant a cardiac pacemaker. A week after Prime Minister Netanyahu was hospitalized for dehydration and had a heart monitoring device implanted, the premier says that device beeped earlier in the evening, which necessitates immediate surgery to implant a pacemaker, a device that prevents one's heart from beating too slowly. And so we're seeing that Netanyahu, 73, will be undergoing a procedure and hopefully will emerge safely from it. We'll have to wait and see for next week's update to see how that transpires. But I think it's interesting that there's a lot of stress and I think it's prophetic and indicative of the real cost of this conflict. And I don't believe it's going to be as easy as some of them thought it would be. And I think that's what the public is now demonstrating is that they are very much opposed to some of these measures, and that is causing a problem. Now, do we really care about that? Not so much. I mean, it's eternal in strife in a country. How many countries are there out there? There's 200 countries out there. There's all kinds of conflicts and difficulties. Why is this important? Well, because of the theater of operations and because of where it is. So because of its importance strategically, its biblical importance, and because of the fact that we have other things going on in that region that have us alerted. Okay, so we've been paying attention to a few things that have been happening there in that part of the world. And of course, you can't really talk about Israel these days, it seems, without somewhere along the line bringing up Iran. Okay. And Iran is, of course, linked almost inseparably, it seems, with Russia. And they're also connecting now with Saudi Arabia. So we talked about that a few weeks ago, how that landscape is now changing. And so now you have Saudi Arabia and Iran starting to work together. In fact, if you recall several weeks ago in an earlier report, we talked about how that Saudi Arabia surprised the United States and Israel by announcing that they would work together with Iran in developing their nuclear program. Okay. And with the support of China. So this plot is thickening very quickly. You've got Israel going into turmoil at the same time that you've got coalition growing around Israel. All right. So can anybody see how this is, the landscape is changing? So you've got Israel now having internal difficulties, having their strife on the inside. And we know where there's envy and strife by the book of James, we know that where there's envy and strife, there is confusion, and every evil will work. By contrast, there's more unity coming again. So this is now spelling a difficult situation going forward. And if you've been paying attention to historical events, you know this is probably a bit of a circling of wagons and a bit of a challenge. And on top of everything else that Israel is facing, because of this judicial review vote and because of this political environment that is charged, you have thousands of military personnel, airmen, the Air Force reservists that are refusing to serve, that have now are in protest of this, what they perceive to be a shoved on them change to their whole constitutional makeup. Okay, so like shifting the balance of power. It's a big deal in Israel, and so it's getting a big reaction. And this is something that I believe is going to set the stage, and maybe deliberately. Sometimes you want to act weak so your enemy thinks they get brave, right? And so that may very well be what we're seeing here. Iran is moving toward the possible atom bomb test. Look at this, folks, in defiance of Western sanctions. So right in the face of Western sanctions, they just don't care. This is what happened because of BRICS. Okay, so because of the BRICS updates and things that are starting to emerge there, countries no longer need the permission, if you will, of the G7 and the Western nations, which also are part of Bible prophecy. A fresh batch of damning European intelligence reports reveal that the Islamic Republic of Iran sought to bypass U.S. and EU sanctions to secure technology for its nuclear weapons program with a view toward testing an atomic bomb. According to the Middle East Media Research Institute, which first published translations of the intelligence documents on its website, the security agencies of Sweden, the Netherlands, and Germany revealed sensitive data during the first 6 months of 2023 on the Iranian regime's illicit nuclear weapons proliferation activities, which is a nice way of saying, hey, we have these and we don't want you to have these, so we're mad at you guys for trying to get these. And that's kind of an interesting attitude considering the arsenal that these other nations have. So it's again an attempt to keep the multi-tiered world where some nations are simply secondary, or as they call it, third world, and they don't want them to emerge. You are now seeing the ceiling, if you will, right? The thing they call the glass ceilings, right? You're seeing it in open display, like, no, you cannot come up to our level, right? And so this is now being pushed back against, folks. And I believe this is part of a setting up of a stage. And if we pay attention to these moving parts, we start seeing justifications. Remember how all conflicts start. Okay, all conflicts start with false flags. All kinds of, somebody gets parties upset, and then somebody, triggers something, and they think they did it. Next thing you know, they're fighting. I heard about if you have red ants and you put them in a jar and you put them in with black ants and you just leave them there, they'll be fine. But if you shake the jar, well, the red ants think the black ants did it, and the black ants think the red ants did it, and they'll fight each other to the death. So they figured that out, and they just get it started and stand back and let opposing forces fight each other. And frankly, I think it's high time we all realize that there's some people that are involved up here on the higher levels, which we're told in Ephesians chapter 6 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of darkness, spiritual wickedness in high places, right? And that's who our enemies are. Well, those enemies are being exposed because some of these decisions are just not the kinds of decisions that a father and a grandfather or a grandmother make, putting their grandchildren at risk for stupid reasons, for petty, stupid reasons. I mean, when you really think about it, these are petty reasons. And that's exactly what they're doing. And millions have already lost their lives in Middle East conflicts, and they're stoking another fight. Some people like death. Some people like dead bodies. Some people like parents killed and children have nobody, they're vulnerable now. So there are those who like that, and that's who we're really against, and those are the forces that are arrayed against us at this point. And so you got to understand that this is going to continue to heat up, and don't think it's just Israel. Pay attention, folks, to what's going on. The reason why we take a look from the 10,000 foot view is so we can go, aha, we see what you got. We're like, like grandparents, they kind of watch the grandkids and they can see who's the good kids and who's the ones trying to make trouble. You know what I'm trying to say? Well, it's the same thing. We have to sit back and we have to look a little bit and go, we see what you're doing over here. Okay, you think you're slick, but you're not slick. We're watching you. And that has to happen. We have to have more sobriety in this hour, more people just paying attention and less sort of caught up in the event and more watching the entire chessboard as it develops. Take a look at this, folks. U.S. is deploying Marines, additional forces to where to? Where are they sending them, guys? Where are they sending these Marines? From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Tripoli's in Libya, folks. Okay? U.S. deployed Marines, additional forces to Middle East following recent Iranian attempted seizures. So they're setting up the false flag scenario right now. If you can see through the lines, right? They're going to send a bunch more folks over there, more tripwires, more reasons to get into an argument. And the U.S. is deploying thousands of Marines and additional forces to the Middle East following recent Iranian attempts to seize commercial shipping vessels, the Pentagon announced Thursday. This latest deployment comes after the Pentagon said earlier this week that it would be sending F-35s and F-16 fighter jets to the Middle East, as well as the USS Thomas Herdner, a guided missile destroyer. Okay, so that's meant to take planes out of the sky and make parking lots. The new forces will consist of an amphibious readiness group and a Marine Expeditionary Unit known as the ARG and MEU, respectively, which typically consists of 3 ships, approximately 2,400 Marines. Okay, so that's a significant force that's being deployed to the Middle East. Coincidentally, while all these things are shaken, while this shaking is going on, okay, and we've got crises happening in the Middle East. And so we've got a theater of operations that we're going to now have to keep a closer eye on as little maneuvers start to happen. And this whole thing with the Supreme Court in Israel, folks, was the Supreme Court had the right, according to the previous setup, to declare a government action to be unreasonable, or it had to have a reasonableness test. And so they're eliminating this, which is, again, a potential precursor for further conflict. So they had to clear a path so that they could do some things. Now, we're going to find out what those things are here very shortly once they've cleared this path. So pay attention. That's why we're paying attention. Okay? And speaking of theater of operations and extending over to the east a little further, of course, China's got its own challenges going on. And China has a bit of a, kind of a Cold War, but an active, interactive conflict with the United States. And this is getting very interesting at this point, folks. So while they back, now pay attention, because China has Saudi Arabia's back and Iran and they just delivered weapons over to Russia quietly. And so, China is playing in this field, and they're not just over there, way over there. Pay attention, folks, because they're doing some really interesting things right here at home, right here in the United States. National security risk. Lawmakers push back as China tries to buy land near a U.S. Air Force base. Foreign ownership of American land is a hot issue these days, especially when it comes to China. The U.S. city that puts this concern on the map is Grand Forks, North Dakota. And by the way, folks, we saw this same report happening in Texas. Okay, so we know that this is not just one place that China is doing this, and of course they had a council vote, and they're pushing back against it, and that's great that there's awakening. But how many other places have they already gained that foothold that there wasn't a rousing pushback against this encroachment? And folks, this is very dangerous because this limits this could maybe potentially interfere with the United States' ability to respond. Should it be attacked? Should it be in a conflict situation? I mean, if you own land right next door, well, I don't know, you might find some clever ways to interfere, or in fact bring your own kinds of attacks. And don't think China's is invulnerable. They are very vulnerable, and as a matter of fact, they're suffering from the inside. The United States suffering economically doesn't actually help China, folks. China needs the United States to overtake the United States. I know that's deep, but stay with me. They need the market. They need the buying power. They need the business that the United States brings. On the one hand, they wanted to just go to war. They were gearing up for it. But as they started to do the math and realize that their own people will take them down if they have a collapse. I mean, culturally, China has a very strong culture about success. Okay, that's why they paint their numbers and they play games with some of that stuff, because success is very important. So if they start failing, they're going to lose power quickly. I mean, they're hanging on by a thread themselves. So they have to keep succeeding, or at least appearing to be successful. Well, without the buying power of the U.S. Consumer who's addicted to Chinese goods, I mean, Dollar Tree much, right? Walmart much, Target much, right? That's all Chinese goods, indirectly or directly. And so you've got a tremendous amount. I mean, iPhones, I mean, all kinds of things are made in China. So, but where's its main and major market? How will it maintain its economy if the United States is not a buyer of their goods? So while on the one hand they have hostility, on the other hand, they're really all interconnected. And they're all finding that out. Like, well, we really can't go to war over Taiwan, because if we do, we won't have any chips. Now take a look at this, China's Evergrande report, and they've been hiding this for a couple of years. They didn't want to admit this because this is damning to their real estate business. And we're going to talk about that here because it's going on worldwide. People are abandoning cities. They're getting the memo. So good job out there, Remnant, for waking people up. I believe the Ruach is awakening people, and I believe he's pulling them out of places of judgment. And China's Evergrande reports 113 billion loss over 2 years. Man, they can lose $113 billion. Like, wow. Okay, and still be in business. But hey, 2 years after it was halted, left for dead, and effectively bankrupt in a controlled demolition, China's one-time property giant Evergrande reported long-delayed results, and boy, were they a whopper. This is, of course, coming from Zero Hedge. They showed that in 2021 and 22, the company generated mind-blowing losses of 113 billion on 340 billion in liabilities. And so things are not good in China economically, and they need additional partners in order to maintain their growth and stay in power. Because what happens when people start to suffer economically, folks? What do they start thinking about politically? Just use your own common sense. What starts happening when people start suffering economically, when things downturn, when they're not making as much money, when years get rough, they want change. And that's no different in China than any place else. Okay. So China's quite afraid of that. And that's motivating them to be very aggressive with their partnerships. I believe that's why they're looking to nations like Iran or Iraq, where there's aggressive growth and aggressive opportunities for um, commercial benefits there, as they help with infrastructure, for example. I mean, China will build you your schools, your roads, anything you want, because they desperately need to keep their economy going. And so and that's one of the reasons why I believe they were bombing the out of Eastern Europe. And Eastern Europe was, of course, a theater that was decimated. The Ukraine and the surrounding area has been very, very severely impacted. But thankfully, there is some good news to report, that we are hearing early rumors, and I believe these will start to be later confirmed. So we'll keep an eye on it. But it looks good that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is finally going to wind down. So they'll move on to some other thing, folks. So don't relax. But nevertheless, at least this particular conflict appears to be winding down a bit. There was a press release that was put out by the Patriots International Alliance to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and essentially it lays out the terms and conditions that they are going to be hopefully agreeing to, and basically cease all forms of support, military and intelligence, to Ukraine immediately. I believe this is why they're holding Ukraine in a certain spot, so they can get the terms and conditions they want from them and then move on. Remember, Ukrainians are essentially Russians, so they want to end this conflict and keep and preserve to what they can, but nevertheless the infrastructure is destroyed. So now this is a great opportunity for the winners to go in and build. And of course that China is going to want that, as opposed to the West getting the opportunity to build that infrastructure. Promptly recall all U.S. and U.K. nationals serving in any form in the territory. Cease all training of the AFU personnel by the USA and Great Britain. Initiate unconditional ceasefire talks between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. So this is good news, folks. This is a good indicator that cooler heads are starting to prevail. Enough dead bodies have shown up. People are getting tired of it, and that's a good thing. And so let's continue to pray that we will see that conflict wind down. And unfortunately, it looks like these conflict mongers, right? These warmongers may just be moving on to yet another conflict. So continue to pray for the protection of the remnant throughout the earth, wherever they may be, and that Elohim will continue to deliver them through these times of great tribulation. And speaking of tribulation, some of it's happening right here at home. It's an indicator. Now, the reason why I'm going to show you this story is not because I want to get involved in any kind of politics, folks. If you've been here for a minute, you know that we only watch politics to watch the wind shift, to see what's going on and catch glimpses, if you will, of patterns. And there are certain things that would never be discussed in the public. And some of us that have been around and seen a few decades of this political theater that we're watching, there are certain things that just don't ever make the light of day. And this is the kind of thing that indicates a massive shift going on behind the scenes. So those that don't think anything is happening, or maybe feel as if there's it's too slow a pace, just understand that these things take time. As I've shared with you, awakening takes time. Be patient. People they don't just awaken to facts, just like you didn't just awaken to certain things. You had to process it. You needed time to deal with the implications, not only of what the new information is that you now know, but also the implications of the failure of the other information you once thought was true. You now have to destroy all those thought patterns and reconcile those things to what you now know. That's not an easy process. That can actually cause some serious psychotic breaks. That can cause people to experience serious bouts of anxiety and even depression. And so, be careful with some of that. Messiah said, there are things that I would share with you, but you cannot bear them. You can't bear it. All right. You wouldn't be able to handle it right now. Okay. And he's talking to grown-ups who'd seen a lot of miracles and demons and all kinds of stuff they'd seen. And he said, there's things I still haven't told you that if I'm going to let the Ruach tell you, right? And when you're ready to receive it. And so in the same way, understand that people are awakening, and as they awaken, they're not really sure what to do with what they're seeing. And I can only imagine politically that people are starting to realize that we have a very corrupt government. Talk about white privilege. And now Hunter Biden can be hit with 10 separate criminal referrals. So what does this indicate? Forget the story. Ignore the details. It doesn't really matter. Here's the point. This doesn't happen, especially not to these guys. These guys are usually protected. These guys are the ones that ski through. These are the guys that you don't ever hear about the problem they had. You certainly don't see it on the front page of the Post. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So the fact that you do, there's at least a certain faction up there that wants you to know about it, that's creating conflict and tension. But B, they're now ditching otherwise usable assets. They're ditching them because they're no longer valuable. In other words, they're throwing them to the dogs, right? This is what you do when you're trying to escape. Okay, you don't ditch assets and throw them to the dogs or throw people off unless you're trying to escape. So you don't release a movie which has Masonic indicators all over it, okay, without me having to go through it. Do your homework, go take a look, and you'll find it if you want to see it. If you're ready to receive it, you'll find it. They don't release something like that for everyone to consume unless it's a mitigation. In other words, I'm going to concede to this so I don't have to talk about this. Do you see what's happening? And so it's a bit of it's a concession to a degree that, oh yes, we have a problem, but it's over here, not over here. So it's still cloak and dagger. It's still as my brother Jeff says, it's still red keeping them. There's still the matador going, ole, right? And people are still falling for, oh, it's over here and it's over there. And they know that the average IQ, the intelligence of the vast majority are not there. They know this, and I'm going to show you how they know. And folks, it's not a joke. This is all part of a multidimensional assault that has been going on for decades, and with intention. So when you see some of these things, it is deliberate, intentionally, to string you through until you arrive at the place that they want you to be. Now we'll shift gears a little bit here, because one of the things that we know in the scripture that we're told about in the book of Revelation is that the mark of the beast and all of the interactive monetary systems will be global. They will be very invasive, such that the prevailing thought is you cannot buy, neither sell, except that you're participating in it, which is a very radical thing, because that means your response needs to be equally radical. After all, if you're going to escape that dragnet, you had better be prepared to do whatever it takes for you and your family to endure to the end. And after all, that is what he said. He that endures to the end, the same shall be saved. And so now we're seeing things like this, where they're bombarding the financial community and the administrative and bureaucratic community with this propaganda, with this information. Okay. And It is basically the blueprint for the future monetary system, improving old, enabling the new. And tokenization of money and assets has great potential, but initiatives to date have taken place in silos, and it's just not good enough. Look at this: a new type of financial market infrastructure, a unified ledger. That sounds innocent enough, right? Sounds like a simple buzz term that you might hear in crypto world or what have you, except what it means is they have control of everybody. Now you understand what that means, okay? So they are the unified ledger. They control the unified ledger, and they get to determine who can and cannot move inside the unified ledger, if you're catching the drift. And it could capture the full benefits of tokenization. They want to capture, notice this word, the full benefits of tokenization by combining. And so now they want to get everyone in one bag, and they want it to be central, and it's bank. And see, they see the central bank as a good thing. They're Hamilton's, men. They all think that this is a great idea, the central bank. This has been called the devil since it was first introduced, and has been fought vehemently by patriots for now centuries. And they're talking about it like it's the best thing that's ever happened. This is what brought us to this place, folks, was central banking and their financing of both sides of conflicts through the centuries. No, I think we've given them quite enough of our time and energy, and it is time for different initiatives to come forward. And that's exactly what you've got going on with the BRICS nations and the quantum financial system that you might be starting to hear about, and other initiatives that are meant to counterbalance or counteract this sort of power grab that is being attempted by this end of the financial market. There's a whole lot of nations that are not playing. And I want to tell you something. Last I heard, 27 states in the United States had applied to join BRICS. What does that say? Right? They're seeing the writing on the wall themselves. And remember, the states are sovereign. And so they have the right to do that. And this is an incredibly powerful moment. Take a look at Texas. Texas is, I think, leading the way. I think Texas is probably the most aggressive, and, things are great in Texas. This just came out. Texas House advances a Goldbacked digital currency bill. And so while they're trying to tell everybody they're going to be on a unified ledger, Texas has taken its first steps in order to approve a bill that would issue a 100% gold-backed digital currency. And if enacted as law, the bill, which is being discussed by a Texas House committee, would create an electronic system for users to transact and pay with this digital currency, and would also allow them to execute redemptions for gold specie or coins backing it. A Texas House committee has taken the first steps in the discussion of a bill that creates a digital currency 100% backed by gold and gold specie. And the bill, identified as HB 4903, which was introduced in March, is now making its way through. So what does this mean, folks? This means that this is essentially a disintegration of the United States. They're not as united as they once were. And the reason why is because confidence in the U.S. fiat dollar, which is not a gold-backed currency, which is a print-on-demand currency, right, and is essentially backed by the full faith and credit of the American people, is failing. Now, they passed a law giving themselves permission to borrow $4 trillion. And what did we discuss as soon as they did that? Who's going to lend it to you? Everybody's abandoning ship on the U.S. dollar. So I guess they're just going to lend it to themselves, right? And whenever a country starts to do that, that's what triggers what's called hyperinflation. So you're already seeing the beginnings of it. How many of you have noticed that a lot of the food that you're buying has already gone up as much as 100, maybe 200%? Something that used to cost $2 is now $4, plus the portion sizes are smaller. So they're double hitting you. They're not just costing you more, but they're also reducing the quantity. That's inflation being hidden from you. Okay. But I mean, not even very well when your grocery bill is literally double. And everybody I talk to is saying it's at least double and more. That's 100% on the ground, real inflation. Okay. And that'll only get worse as they start to play games with these things. And what's going to start to happen? Well, banks are going to start to fail, folks. And that's what we've been seeing. And we're seeing that people are becoming unbanked. People no longer have confidence in the banks. Banks become desperate, start getting fee happy, right? Next thing you know, you're paying $30 3 times for one transaction that didn't go through. Man, how long do people keep those accounts open? Eventually, they start shutting them. And as a matter of fact, the banks themselves are closing accounts right now in numbers that are a little bit startling on your side. Bank customers report unexpected bank closures. And this is just came out this last week. So we're paying attention to the story. A growing number of bank customers are having their account shut down without much warning or explanation, leaving them without access to their money. The banks do this when they suspect some form of bank fraud, but experts say in the majority of cases, no fraud is ever found, leaving customers to wonder, why me? So, a convenient excuse to hold your funds, a convenient excuse to interfere with your business. And because the courts are clogged and what are you really going to do about it, right? They have you. And this is very, very abusive. And it's a hidden way to oppress the people that nobody would notice because who's going to hear about all of that? Only people dealing with is the guy storming out of the bank, going to his car, who doesn't even have money for his gas. Okay. And he just got told that his bank account's frozen and he can't get access to his paycheck. And he was living paycheck to paycheck as it was. You don't see this. You don't see what's really being done here. This is a deliberate and intentional attempt to make that man go crazy. And we've seen a couple of movies where we've seen that. Michael Douglas played in one. I believe Will Smith played in another. And we've seen these movies and these enactments where men have just lost it, right, or had to really deal with these problems. I believe they've been programming and they want an explosion. They want a social explosion, something they can blame someone else on because right now we can all see the failure of central banking. We can all see the red cape, right, that they've been pulling. And now they need something, some kind of conflict, something else to blame for the failure instead of themselves, instead of this mathematical shell game that they've been playing for quite some time. A fiat currency typically only lasts and survives 20 to 30 years. This thing's been operating on fiat gas for over 40. So it's overdue for an overhaul, if you know what I mean. And they know that, folks, and they understand it. They understand it better than you think they do. And they don't want you to put two and two together. They want you to only be focused on your little world and not take your head up and take a look from the 10,000-foot view. But that's exactly what we're going to do on this channel. Okay. And we're going to take a look at what's really happening. Look at June home sales. They're dropping to the lowest pace in 14 years. Somebody want to tell me what happened 14 years ago? Well, we had the 2008 collapse and crisis. So we're talking, these numbers haven't been seen since 2009. That's what they're saying here. All right. June home sales were 18.9% lower compared with last year. That's the slowest pace for June since 2009. That is typically the hottest month. June, July, or the summer months is when realtors depend on selling homes. There's simply not enough homes for sale, says Lawrence Yun, chief economist for the realtors. So they put a screeching halt to building lower price and medium price homes. Sales of pre-owned homes dropped 3.3% in June compared to May, running in a seasonally adjusted annualized rate of 4.16 million units, according to the National Association of Realtors. Compared with June of last year, sales were 18.9% lower. And how many want to bet they're still fudging those numbers? In other words, they don't want to tell you all the bad news at once, because if they do, then what happens to the market? It gets even worse, right? So this is the cleaned up version of the report. If this is the one that made the newspaper, this is the one that got released to the public. What do you suspect is the actual reality? Yeah, use your discernment. I'll leave it up to you. Like to see your comments in the chat or in the video. Because it's It's all around us, folks. And it's not something that we can just turn our eyes away from and say, well, that's not going to affect me. Yes, it will. These things have a way of rippling. There are a lot of people that then think they were going to be affected in 2008 and 2007 or 8 and 9, and they suddenly were. And the economy began to affect everybody. So don't think that just because you're not in a particular situation that these types of things aren't going to start to affect all of us in some way. And again, the economic data continues to come in to cause us some concern. Right now, we're looking at continued bank closures. And again, they're trying to do this quietly, folks. But nevertheless, this is what's making the paper. So if this many made the paper, do the logical thing. Say, well, this is what they're telling us. So what's the real numbers? You get me? And if they're whatever liars admit to, the story's bigger, right? If you know someone's a liar, and they're admitting something to you, it's worse than they're admitting, just so you know. Closing time. Full list of 98 banks closing within weeks, including HSBC and Barclays. HSBC is huge. Barclays is huge. These are blue chip companies as I was growing up as a young man, right? And so these are going down. Data from Link and UK's largest cash machine network revealed dozens of banks are set to close branches between July 24th and August 31st, starting today, right now. Okay, and people are missing this, or not getting these reports, or not, because this is getting slipped under the radar, right? And you guys are on top of it, but I'm saying the average people, they're not paying attention to this stuff. So this is going to catch a lot of folks, like we just found out. Closures, account closures. All of a sudden, they can't get at their money. All of a sudden, it's not available. What? And then they're scaring you away from crypto, all to lead you to their Fed now, all to lead you to their central bank product, right? They want to scare you away from everything else. Are you watching this? Are you paying attention? They want to scare you away from every other thing so you come home to the central bank. Come on in. We're going to make it wonderful. We're going to give you Fed Now payments, like they just invented instant payment. Like they haven't heard of Cash App. You know what I'm trying to say? Like they're pretending they invented something. Instant payments. Yeah, crypto's had instant payments for years. There's nothing new about instant payments. There's nothing fancy about it. It's something they should have been doing all along. Goes to show you that checks and their 3 and 5 day floats and you got to wait 10 days for this to clear was always a lie. And they're now slowly admitting it so we can see the game. I tell you, Saints, I'm so glad more people are waking up, because I do feel like they're not going to quite get away with it the way they think they are. And shout out to Mike Adams over at Natural News. Do you know that they've got a world global digital currency tied to the global digital ID? So this is another thing that they're going to be pushing really hard, and they're going to make it seem like you've got no choice. Folks, yes, you do. Yes, you do. You can drink lemonade on the porch, get a little Amish on this thing, and say, you know what? Y'all can keep all that. You can keep all of it. Bye, man. Bye. Okay. There comes a point at which you might just have to say, that's just too far, right? And they're asking too much. And here we go, folks. They're winding up. Thank you, Mike Adams over at Natural News. We appreciate you. We love you. WorldCoin CEO, global digital currency tied to global digital ID will soon be required, whether you like it or not. Look at this. Whether you like it or not. You seeing this? That's arrogant. Okay? That's arrogant. I've been saying for nearly 2-3 years that the beast system is based on the world's people accepting 2 technological components offered by the Luciferian global elites. A globally recognized digital ID to replace the cards in your wallet, and a globally recognized digital money to replace the cash in your wallet. You got to replace the ID and you've got to replace the money. And forcing people to identify themselves also allows you to trick them into being human beings instead of men and woman. Okay, which was a trick term come up to make people chattel property or slavery or slaves. These folks are clever. All right. Yeah. Well, let's have a new system, but nobody that was part of the old system can be involved in the new one. That's a nice little rule, don't you think? That might slow them down. They wouldn't be so excited about pulling it off when they know they're going to commit harikari right at the line, right? They can't cross over into the world they're creating for everybody. Bet they won't be so excited then. Okay. And this is starting to create major changes. So now what we're going to see, because we're on the brink, okay, of a major shift in economic policies, the BRICS nations are, as you know, about to release their own digital currency that they're all going to trade and close business in. And the only way that that's successful is if they make very long-term commitments to that process. So this can't be a short-term thing. And this in and of itself is a war. It is a financial war that is going on. So the BRICS nations are now going to be reluctant to do trade with any country or any group that doesn't have a gold or asset-backed currency that can trade on par. You catching on? So that now explains why you have Texas and other states and other places that are now floating the idea of their own gold-backed currency because they can't wait, and they're going to have to do business in an international level, and the only way they can do that is with an asset-based or an asset-backed currency. So they're basically going to be putting the central bank out of business by default because they don't have that. And they don't produce anything. So they don't have any real assets unless they've stolen them from a nation, right? You see, this thing ends kind of brutally, folks. I don't know how else to say that, but this is going to come to an abrupt end. It's the last stop at the station, and this train ain't got brakes, and the people driving it are nuts. They're a suicide cult, and they don't mind killing you and everybody else while they die. I mean, they're that crazy. And so what's happening is you're going to see nations starting to retreat from interacting on a normal trade basis with first world countries. Okay, take a look at this. This is a staple, folks. All right. And India triggers inflation fears by imposing a major rice export ban, a ban on exporting rice. They banned it. Okay. This is a country. So when countries start to do this, they're saying, hey, we're concerned about the resources in our own country. So we're not going to be selling any to anybody. What does that sound like to you? If you heard that on the news, hey, the grocery stores have decided that the staff have only enough groceries inside the stores to cover their needs. They're going to close the store. This is not a good sign, folks. And this is a BRICS nation, right? That's India is what the I in BRICS stands for. India on Thursday ordered a halt to its largest rice export category in a move that will roughly have shipments by the world's largest exporter of the grain, triggering fears of further inflation on global food markets. So we haven't seen enough inflation, folks. Stand by for some more as they warn you. So why is this happening? Because you're dealing with a snake, and a snake has to constrict you. And that's what this is. It's perpetual constriction. This is meant to make desperation occur. Desperate people do dumb things. People that are hungry are easy to manipulate. Food is the ultimate weapon, especially against a population. And so those that are unprepared, those that don't know how to feed themselves or can't feed themselves for whatever reason, they have put themselves in a state of vulnerability. And we warned about it. Many other people were warning about it. Most people were paying no attention to this. And now they're suddenly going to find out why a lot of folks in the remnant are, sharing photos and gardening and making their own food. Why? Because, hey, you won't be able to buy or sell without their game. That's what the scripture says. That's right there in plain English. Okay. And you know that part of the reason why the United States was involved in this theater of operations in Eastern Europe was for natural resources. Don't you think grain was part of that? And Russia has now, because they're the victor in the conflict, has nixed. The Russia's nixing of Ukraine deal deepening worries about a global food supply. On July 17th, the Russian government announced that it was pulling out of a deal to facilitate the export of millions of tons of grain from Ukrainian ports. And basically, they took over all Black Sea ports, by the way. The arrangement has been in place since July 2022. The Kremlin's move immediately sparked concern, particularly in food insecure countries. The Kenyan government was quick to denounce the withdrawal as a stab in the back. And so, it's getting tight. I mean, to the point where, countries are going to be looking out for their own, if you know what I mean. And right now, when you go to the grocery store in the United States, you're going to an international plaza. You got things from all over the earth that showed up just in time for you to pluck them right out of the little bins in your grocery stores, right? And go home with, Nicaraguan, Asian, African, North, or European food all in your bag. Like nothing happened. You don't even notice where it came from. Okay. Well, you will when it's no longer there because they can't get it, or it's 4 times what it normally is because demand is there and supply has dropped. So plan on more, not less, food inflation, unfortunately, Saints. And this is part again of the squeezing because, they want to basically put everybody on, I guess food stamps of some sort so that they have control over you. I mean, if they're the only way you can get food, that they can tell you what to do and you're going to do it. All right. And on top of these things, so to make matters worse, and again, you'll have people that'll say, oh no, that really was a naturally occurring Canadian fire. Nothing to see here, folks. Absolutely normal. No big deal. Oh, is it affecting farmland all across the upper Midwest? Oh my, didn't see that coming. Gee, what happened there, right? Folks, pay attention. Biggest smoke plume yet from Canadian wildfires to blanket how many states? What does that say? 23 states today. These things have things in them that we still don't know and won't find out for some time. Not a lot of people going around doing soil sampling, right? To see what's really dropping on these areas. But I can tell you right now, I don't trust these guys at all. 23 states today is code orange warnings issued for vulnerable residents to stay indoors, as if, magically, because you're inside, you're not affected by the contaminants that are all around your house because your house is hermetically sealed. Nonsense. Okay. And so people are going to be affected. People are going to get sick. Another massive plume of smoke from Canada hit the lower 48 on Monday, with air quality in some half of the U.S. states expected to be impacted at least through Tuesday. Smoke swept through the U.S. cities and states on the East Coast Monday, prompting local health authorities to issue air quality warnings amid, look at this, air quality warnings. Okay, and requested people with health issues that may make them vulnerable to smoke stay inside. Everybody's vulnerable to smoke. What do you mean if I have health issues? You mean if I breathe? Are you a breather? Do you breathe? Oh, well, if you're a breather, then you better go inside because you'll have health issues. This is crazy. How does this affect the soil? When I grew up, as I was growing up in America, and those that are in my generation will tell you that we heard about acid rain ad nauseum. Ad nauseum. They just never stopped talking about how that the rain brought down whatever particulates was in the air and how it would contaminate the soil and how this was terrible and we needed to clean it up. And, come on, the pitch. This was going from the 70s. Okay. Well, all of a sudden we forgot all about that. But these contaminants are now being washed down into soil, which is now going to get into the crops, into the rivers, into the lakes, into the streams. And now the scripture that says that he'll make the waters bitter is fulfilled. Didn't even see it coming. And how many people in harm's way don't even know it? Okay, because they're recalcitrant. They're going to stick there. They're going to dig in. This is where my families live. This is where my grandpappy lived. My grandmammy lived. Fine, just keep it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't buy a vacation place that you can dip to until when this is over. You can go back, right? I mean, use common sense. Might have to leave for a minute and come back at a different time. Okay, and so these are the kinds of things that are coming. And again, by themselves might not be that big a deal. Like when you see the derailment that we talked about last week, right? And that just disappears from the news cycle. Did you notice that just gone? All these places that were down rail waiting for supplies, that's all done. All those businesses that were waiting for their inventory that was on that train, it's sitting on the side of the road now. They got to go through a whole new process. And what if that's the only way to get some of those resources, which I'm pretty sure is the case for some of those manufacturers and distributors and so forth? You might have put them out of business without no one even knowing. It's not on the news or anything. Okay, all these little things ripple, and you know it and I know it. When we go to work, we find out something that never even made the news, but it's going to affect our supply, or it's going to affect our ability to do our job. And now they're attacking. And I mean, this is, I believe, an attack. This is the worst time in the world to have this problem. And here UPS is about to go on strike. So just to make matters worse, I mean, as if it wasn't bad enough, right? UPS, talk about the backbone of the delivery system of the United States, right? So everybody gets stuff by UPS. We get UPS deliveries almost every day. Okay. And they're talking about shutting it down and having a strike. Look at this. As talks between UPS and the union that represent more than 300,000 delivery drivers breaks down, a strike this summer is looking more likely. This could impact 25 to 30% of parcels and packages shipped in the USA. Once again, they're telling you this number. What do you think it is most likely? Lower or higher, right? The Teamsters represent 340,000 UPS workers. The Teamsters just decided to knuckle down, right, at this in just perfect timing. And you just see it. I mean, if you can see it, you see it. And UPS is huge. It's a huge part of the U.S. internal economy. So those of you that are outside the United States, maybe you have other services that you rely on. In the United States, UPS is like the go-to. It is just above the Postal Service, and the Postal Service is not great. So this is crazy what's going on right now. And this has got the potential to really, really do harm to the economy. So once again, now what's going to likely happen to the shipping costs of things? It's likely to go up with less choices. And as a result, what's the likely ripple effect that's going to happen to your prices? It's going to go up, which means inflation again, or devaluing of the money. And it's almost like they need excuses to cover up why their money is being devalued. Okay. Just like I think they need excuses for why they have to close a whole bunch of restaurants and stores that are not going to be solvent. All right. When we heard about reports coming out about the ingredients of the number one fast food franchise, I don't have to tell you which one that is, right? They certainly have their problems. Well, they all do. Take a look at this. Is kind of this qualifies in gross, disgusting, but I think it's a bit of a indicator of the real problems they're having. Burger King employee faces 20 years in prison for allegedly serving up French fries pulled from the trash can. What is this meant to do? Why is this in the news? Why are we hearing about this? They want you to. What's this going to do to Burger King business? Burger King assistant manager faces, it's not just a regular employee either, by the way. It's an assistant manager, faces up to 20 years in prison after she allegedly served customers French fries that were pulled from a trash can. That is disgusting. That is absolutely disgusting. And the fact that we know about this says that essentially it's a controlled demolition. So we're seeing a continuation of the coincidences that took down food processing plants. Speaking of plants that got taken down. I'll just share this. Do 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 do. Yeah, the Pfizer plant. That looks like judgment. That's kind of creepy, but it could also be, hey, elimination of evidence. Who knows? I mean, that's a little spooky. That it just so happened at the Pfizer plant, and 50,000 or 50 million or some ridiculous number of juice bottles went bye-bye. So you can tell me what you think that is. Now, in the book of Daniel, we are told that there's going to be a combining of the clay with metal, right? Iron and clay. And many have interpreted that to mean what we're seeing in these hours with artificial intelligence and their attempt to integrate this heavily into our lives. And we see Japan is deploying what's called pre-crime technology so they can behavior detect, so they can get ahead of potential problems in crime. I mean, that's a little on the wild side, but that's now a thing. So pre-crime, I think we saw that in a movie as well. And they are also, of course, working hard to, there's a report on Remnant Watch where they're working hard to merge AI with human brain cells. So, folks, this effort to combine us with the machines is continuing on. And so this is the hour that we're in. And I think that the big picture issues that we've got coming up in August with the BRICS nations gathering in Johannesburg, South Africa, is a foreboding for international finance, and is going to make major changes. So this is going to be a bumpy period from here up to the fall feast and beyond. Is probably going to be more conflict, more things happening on the world scene to distract, so that they can continue to pull off, what they want to pull off. And they're committed to it. And we knew that going in. And so, folks, understand the hour that you're in. It's not a pretty picture, but at the same time, we knew this was coming. We knew from the scripture that they would hurt that a grain would become expensive, that it would take a day's wages. For example, the book of Revelation tells us it would take a day's wages to buy grain. So we're seeing the setup for that, and the arena of the world arena, if you will, being set up to fulfill the remaining prophecies of the scripture. What does that say to all of us? It tells us the king is coming. It tells us our time is short and that we should be looking up because our redemption draws nigh. And this is the time that we, according to the book of Hebrews, should not be forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but instead exhorting one another, and all the more as we do see the day approaching. And so if you're wondering, well, what's the plan? What do I do as I see these things unfolding? This should all be confirmations to you that the time of your disconnection from Babylon is nigh, is upon you. In Revelation chapter 18, he literally commands us to come out of her, my people. So the disconnection is not optional if you're going to endure to the end. If you're going to stay inside the beast system and try and endure there, hoping to be raptured, you're going to end up ruptured. We were warned for a reason. We were warned so that we could endure, so we could overcome. Amen. And if you love your life in the world, if you love that life, okay, then unfortunately that's going to cost you. That's what the scripture tells us. He was plain about it. Messiah did not mince words. If you love your life in the world, you're going to lose it. Okay. He who forsakes that life and grabs a hold of the life he's offering will have life eternal. And so those that are trying to have their best life now and do great in the matrix don't realize that they're being captured as slaves. They even use the word capture, folks. They even use this word. They're not even bashful about it. And so that's exactly what it is. They want to bring people into captivity. But remember what the scripture says: he that leads into captivity shall go into captivity. And so this is why it's important for all of you to seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, to ask him where you belong, to find the place that would be the most beneficial for you and your family, wherever that is. And maybe you're one that's going to establish a place that he sends you to do and says, plant a flag here, hold here, I'm going to bring more people around you. Folks, we got to start changing the way we think, because as you can see, there are decisions being made without consulting us. There are plans being made in your world and implemented in your world that are not in our best interest and do not benefit us directly. In fact, benefit hidden powers that we can't even identify. And it doesn't matter whether you're here in the United States, in Africa, in Asia, New South Wales or Sydney. It doesn't matter where you are. We all have to stop thinking that this system has got solutions for us. This has produced nothing but problems for us our whole entire existence. Instead, we have to walk away. Somebody asked me, well, what do I do? If you're asking me and you're asking what my example would be, you're going to step out on your back deck and see nothing but blue sky and fair sea and fair winds, if you will, nothing but mountains and clear land where no one's imposing anything upon you. Okay. And yeah, you might have to grow your own food. You will have to grow your own food. You will have to take care of yourself. You will have to tend your own garden. Imagine that. Imagine a man having to tend a garden. Why, I seem to recall that's where this all began. Thank you for joining us tonight. I pray this broadcast has been a blessing to you. And I certainly hope that you all are continuing to pray one for another, to love one another as he commanded us, and to remember to look up, because your redemption is drawing nigh. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on Shabbat. Hopefully you'll join us for that. Again, next week, this same time, we'll take another look from the 10,000-foot view. Remember, we want to be informed, but we don't want to be overwhelmed. Amen. May Elohim bless each and every one of you. Good night.